What's happening, guys? This is Logan Robinson from NoleGameday.com. We're here live on a wonderful, fantastic Monday afternoon, and it's just D-Lou and I recapping Florida State's second scrimmage of fall camp. We just got some press conferences from Tony White, Florida State's new defensive coordinator, and Gus Malzahn. We're going to give our thoughts on what they had to say about it also, too. We were in that presser last night on Zoom with Mike Norvell. He revealed some players that were working with the ones, had some standout plays from some players on the offensive side of the ball, to point out some defensive guys. But I think we're going to talk a lot about what Tony White just had to say, calling out some players, not specifically some names, but definitely sending a message to the defense, not fully pleased from what he saw in the second scrimmage from the defensive side of the ball. We'll dive deep into that as well, including a true freshman on the offensive side, working with the ones and becoming a major standout in fall camp. But with me this afternoon is Dustin Lewis, our editor-in-chief. No VZ today, just you and I. How we doing?
It's great to be back. I mean, we're getting closer to that Alabama kickoff by the day. We were just talking about it. Only 19 days to go until Florida State finally opens up this 2025 season, and about halfway through fall camp right now through that second scrimmage. And this is the part where Florida State, they're really going to start to dial in on that Alabama prep and figuring out how that depth chart is going to shake out when we get that. And under 2 weeks from today, we should have our first official depth chart from Florida State. So I think the excitement, it's just continuing to build as we actually get closer to the real thing, instead of just having to be like, all right, we're 3 months away. It's right there.
I know. Actually be in Doak Campbell Stadium and have a kickoff and actually have some true analysis to really give. Right now, it's more of hearing some things, talking to people, hearing from the coaching staff, and then it's just a lot of the guessing game, though, and really intrigued to see what that depth chart is going to look like, because this is something new, at least from Mike Norvell's tenure for us covering the team. When we were there, you could certainly project on who is going to be starting, who's going to be available for this upcoming, season opener. But a lot of things are on the table right now of who's going to be out there in a couple weeks in Doak to kick off this new season. So really looking forward to that. But before we get started, if you're on YouTube right now, smack the like button. If you want to see more videos like this, we're posting a lot of presser stuff as well, including that Tony White and Gus Malzahn interview that is on here on the YouTube channel. So hit that subscribe button so then it notifies you every time we release a new episode. But we've got plenty to talk about in this second scrimmage, D-Lou. And I think we go ahead and start off with what Mike Norvell was talking to us about last night, talking about the response from your QB1 with Thomas Castellano. So I want to say it was early drive in that scrimmage.
First drive,
yeah. So first drive, Thomas Castellanos throws an interception to Jeremiah Wilson, who was a big-time pickup for them in the transfer portal coming from Houston. He gets picked off from Wilson and then responds and has 2 scoring drives, one of them being a big play, like Gus Malzahn just told us in his presser. But that's something I think was really important to Gus, as he was just talking about it just a little bit ago. And then, of course, Mike Norvell seeing the response from him, because I think it was coming from a play where Thomas Castellanos was trying to make a play out of nothing almost, took the shot, took the gamble. And sure enough, when you're going against a guy like Jeremiah Wilson, who has been an absolute stud for you so far in camp, some things don't go in your favor. And sure enough, he got picked off. But the response was really important from this coaching staff.
And it sounded like it was just a really great play by Jeremiah Wilson on defense to force his turnover. And it was something that Mike Norvell talked about. Tommy Castellanos hasn't thrown a ton of interceptions during camp. So when he was picked off during the scrimmage, like you kind of said, Logan, Norvell and the coaching staff, they wanted to see how he would respond, how he would bounce back from that. Because obviously, last year during that 2024 season, whenever FSU faced negatives or adversity, the team flat out crumbled. And Norvell wanted to see something different from his quarterback this time around. And he actually said, you don't ever want a mistake, but sometimes you need to see what's real, because you're not going to be mistake-free. Went on to say how he responded, it probably gives me more confidence than all the other things you see when it's going well. It's the mark of a great quarterback, and it's what you have to be able to do. We're challenging Tommy, and what I like is he's challenging himself. And Norvell went on to talk about how Tommy has continued to grow as a complete quarterback during fall camp, and they really just wanted to see him bounce back from this interception. Like you said, Logan, I mean, he did that, went out, led multiple touchdown drives, had a deep throw to Squirrel White that resulted in a touchdown where you're able to see all the speed from the senior wide receiver. And, Castellanos, it seems like he's really taken this offense by the reins. I mean, obviously he's got that experience playing in Gus Malzahn's system from UCF, but he's taken it to a new level during the preseason. I mean, continued to foster chemistry with his wide receivers, tight ends, other skill players. That offensive line, as Norvell talked about, is coming along. So, I think things are in a good spot here as we get closer and closer to the Alabama game.
To add on to the setting here, really didn't go into it before we began, but once again, Florida State went through a lightning delay. They were just having some bad luck on this so far, but that's just what happens. Definitely in Tallahassee during the summer days, you're always going to have two storms during it, and definitely one in the evening as well. But they were able to get a lot more time though in Doak Campbell Stadium. They have this webcam that everybody has been tracking the Doak renovations on throughout the entire offseason. But with that, you can also keep an eye on the team being out there in scrimmages. So you can also take some notes from that if you would like. But they were able to get a lot more time, like Mike said, in Doak, which was really important too for the coaching staff because they were pretty limited in what they were able to do in the IPF. And I think there's some logistical things that they want to get better at communication wise. I know Tony White was pressing on that as well, but he felt a lot better about how they communicated all across the board in the scrimmage. But we'll dive deeper into the defense with Tony White in just a minute. But let's stick to the offense here. I think one thing that really stood out to both you and I during that Zoom meeting yesterday, Dustin, was Usman Kroma being brought up as the best running back on the field on yesterday evening. What was your take on that? Because, we've heard a lot of good things about Usman Kroma. It was a massive flip for Florida State coming from Georgia. But this is a guy that in this scrimmage alone scored multiple touchdowns in the red zone. And also, too, as Gus Malzahn just said about 30 minutes ago, he's getting reps with the ones, ladies and gentlemen. And I think that says a lot about the young man coming down and getting the playbook down. But not only that, whenever, yes, you can always do great. You can make some plays with the ball in your hands, but there's a lot more importance of pass protection and also to take it on your blocks, et cetera, et cetera. It seems like he's taking those strides earlier on in order to get opportunities with the ones like Gus Malzahn was just talking about.
Spoke volumes to me. I mean, Mike Norvell was asked straight up, who is your best running back during that second preseason scrimmage? And, he kind of started out with a coach speak answer, said, I thought there were some good runs, but the first guy he mentions by name is Usman Kroma. And, as we've seen these last couple of weeks, this guy has transitioned extremely well to Florida State. Logan, you got to pull up that Blake Nicholson clip. We got to show that, but
yeah,
he's done very well. I mean, Norvell knew how talented this guy was. We heard running backs coach David Johnson call him just different ahead of the preseason beginning. And I mean, since then, whenever some of these other running backs have come into the press conferences, I think back to Gavin Salchuk, but Salchuk said that Kroma is far ahead of where he was when he was going into his freshman year. And this guy, I mean, as we're seeing, he's just continuing to produce, did pretty well. It sounded like in that first preseason scrimmage comeback. And like Logan said, scores multiple touchdowns on Sunday night. And, in between these practices, he's been doing some things as well. We saw one highlight in Jacksonville of him running through the entire defense, laying a stiff arm down on somebody. Yeah. And then we had this clip that Logan's trying to pull up from came out yesterday, but this happened while they were in Jacksonville. And it's basically an offense versus defense drill down there on the goal line. The offensive player has to pick up a ball and then get across the goal line and basically win the rep. The defensive guy has to hold him back. And you had Kroma, guy who's been at the college level now for about 3 months, matched up against Blake Nicholson going into his third season at Florida State. And it led to an interesting rep.
Yeah, no, it went on Twitter. So here's a little bit of the other that's the one from the previous clip earlier in the week, but put a nasty stiff arm move there and shedding off the defender. But here's the play of Usman Kroma. There's Mike Norvell too, watching very closely Thomas Castellanos and them, but watch Usman Kroma here on Blake Nicholson, linebacker. Woo, Lordy. I mean, of course, that gets clipped quickly on FSU Twitter and everybody's tweeting it. But we'll watch this again. And, yeah, Blake Nicholson just got tossed. And I'll tell you what, man, whenever you're wearing the number that he's wearing in number 32, I mean, it just immediately reminds you of James Wilder Jr. I mean, this young man has came in built as well. He's certainly loves the weight room, but you can have that. You can have a guy that's physically built and very strong, but whenever you're able to put it out onto the field and make plays and still be shifty, yes, he'll use his physicality for sure. But go watch some of his tape, his high school tape. You know, this guy, he runs with physicality, but he's got some nice feet as well and can make plays. But right here, it just shows how strong this young man is, and just tosses him, says goodbye, adios.
I mean, that's a rep right there. True freshman.
True freshman. Just coming in. And I mean, it's been teased by this coaching staff that we'll see some Usman Kroma this upcoming season. It's going to be hard to keep him off the field. But now I think we're starting to get into some sort of conversation here of where we're going to see a potential argument to where is this young man going to be a starter? Is he going to be named a starter as we go into this season, D-Lou, because it seems like they were able to find a special guy in the backfield.
He's doing everything right to this point. You know, I don't know if he's going to be the starter when Florida State kicks off against Alabama. Mm-hmm. But, you know, considering this guy missed the spring, didn't enroll until the summer, and, I mean, is really getting his first true taste of the college level these last 10 practices for Florida State. The first impressions have been beyond, I think, what Florida State's coaching staff and players expected with Kroma coming in, and they already had high hopes for him. But, I mean, he's jumped right into the mix, and he's setting himself up for a heck of a true freshman season. You know, like we said, the first guy that Norvell talked about when speaking about the running backs also mentioned Gavin Sawchuk and Roydell Williams in that top three. And obviously those two guys are both veterans with a ton of experience at the college level. But I just think Kroma is just so naturally talented. And obviously, like you said, Logan, he came in physically looking very well for a true freshman running back. I mean, he already looks like a guy who's been at the college level working out for probably 2 or 3 years. He's got that shiftiness, that physicality on the field. You know, I just haven't really seen too many negatives from him so far during the preseason. And obviously this back half of camp is going to be very important to continue shoring up where he stands in that depth chart. But I mean, as of now, you've definitely got to expect this guy, if he doesn't start on August 30th, to be your number 2 and at the very least that number 3 option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just looking at that highlight video, Usman Kroma was the only running back highlighted in that video, and multiple times too. It wasn't just him by himself. I mean, it was multiple clips of him in that reel. So something to keep a very, very close eye on. And, you know, we'll get some more words once we get closer to that kickoff against Alabama. But this seems like a young man that is going to see a lot of playing time in 2025. And I'm sure all the FSU fans are pretty excited for this young man to hit the field. You know, another player that's been standing out consistently, D-Lou, is Squirrel White, who seems to be at 110%. He continues to make some plays. He was just in that highlight reel as well. He seems like someone that's putting himself in some good position to be one of your star players on this team overall, making splash plays, these explosive plays, connecting well with Thomas Castellanos. And to be honest, in a lot of these clips that we've been seeing throughout this actually really fall camp from Squirrel White, this guy is wide open. This guy is pretty wide open, and he's been making some splash plays. But that's something that Mike Norvell answered on during the Zoom meeting, saying that he feels like he's back to where he was and his healthy days at Tennessee, which is a really good sign for Florida State's offense, because you need that connection built with Thomas Castellanos and to also help out Deuce Robinson, who's going to be a massive playmaker for you in this upcoming season.
It's huge. I mean, you need that deep threat on offense, and obviously Squirrel White, he just brings so much potential of what this unit could be with that playmaking ability. And, you know, he was somewhat limited during the spring, but got fully healthy during the summer. And I mean, has just continued to stay on the right track now going into preseason and as fall camp has continued. And sounds like he had one of his better outings on Sunday evening, you know, like we spoke about earlier, catching that long touchdown pass from Tommy Castellanos, showing off that speed and athleticism, which, I mean, is great for him coming off a season at Tennessee where he was a little bit banged up. And, you know, I'm sure he's got to be feeling a lot better to be closer to 100% and here on the field contributing to this Florida State offense instead of back during the spring where he was a little bit limited. And, obviously not only with what he does on the field, but Mike Norvell talked about him as a leader as well. And that seems like another facet where he's been impressed with Squirrel White and, having him, Deuce Robinson. I mean, those two guys are going to be extremely important at the top of that Florida State wide receiver room. And, we'll see if some of these other youngsters are able to rise to the occasion. It seemed like Gavin Blackwell was able to get some reps last night, still trying to figure out where he exactly fits into things after just getting into Florida State for preseason camp. So there are still some questions to answer at wide receiver. Luane McCoy has been out recently with a lower body injury, but to have a guy like Squirrel White and Deuce Robinson, both those guys now back fully healthy after spring practice, that's going to be extremely important for this room going into 2025.
Sticking on the offensive side of the ball, let's go to Mekhi Danzy, another one that has been brought up immensely from this coaching staff, from both Gus Malzahn and Mike Norvell, but he's one that continues to make plays when they are in these scrimmage settings. And, he just came back from an injury when he was running track, who he was absolutely killing it, one of the fastest in the country as a true freshman. But now he gets to go at it at a new position, going over to wide receiver. And it seems like he is making some big time plays, but they want to see more consistency. And that's kind of the whole case around those guys behind Squirrel White and Deuce Robinson. They're trying to find who's that third guy, who's going to be that fourth guy, who's going to be in that rotation there, that 3 and 4 piece. But Mekhi Danzy is one that continues to be brought up. And, the one key thing I took away from Gus Malzahn this morning was that, they love to see the ball in this young man's hands, because it seems like he's making some plays all across the field and connecting well with the quarterbacks. But that's something that should certainly excite you a little bit, definitely with the amount of speed, as you know, D-Lou, covering him all throughout his high school days. This guy has some serious speed, and it could add a lot to Gus Malzahn's offense this upcoming year.
He's just a burner. I mean, he's got some of those athletic traits that just can't be coached. And if he does figure out the nuances of this wide receiver position, I mean, he could be a very good one for Florida State. Now, Mike Norvell, he did talk about how Danzy missed some practice time back in the spring. And, obviously he was kind of back and forth between football and track at the time, and really going out there and dominating on the track, winning that ACC championship, setting multiple program records, set conference records as well. And like Logan said, I mean, just a true freshman. I mean, he's still got a long college career ahead of him, but he missed some important reps on the field during the spring. So I mean, it's been a little bit up and down, and he's still making that transition here during the preseason. Still has some things to learn. Still has plenty of room to grow at that wide receiver position. But I think that they've been impressed, with what he's shown, especially during these scrimmages. They talked about, or Mike Norvell talked about, that big play he had where he cut across the field and broke multiple tackles and was able to get a 20, 25-yard gain in that first scrimmage. And then, once again, he's one of the skill players that Mike Norvell name drops on Sunday nights. I mean, Danzy, even though he's relatively new to this wide receiver position, it's not something that he did a lot in high school either. This is a guy who's been primarily a running back throughout his football career. I think just with his natural athleticism and some of those big plays he can bring to the field, he's going to be a guy that gets a look for Florida State once the fall rolls around.
Someone that's getting some opportunities as a two-way player, both offensively and defensively too, is Amari Williams. As we know, worked at the edge position, also was a tight end last year. Like, he's just all over the place, but he was brought up, I thought was really significant from Mike Norvell as well. And it's going to be interesting to see what he looks like going into this season. But definitely just going off some videos and some pictures, I'm sure whenever you were able to see him walking into practice, D-Lou, I mean, this guy has put on some serious size, and he comes in with a lot of confidence. I love it. He was one that told reporters last year, I want to be a Travis Hunter. I want to be an offensive and defensive player. I want to be a two-way guy. And I think that's really impressive. He's just got to work on his consistency, but he certainly did put in a lot of work in that weight room with Coach Storm. So I just wanted to bring him up because that was someone that was highlighted from Mike Norvell for his performance in this scrimmage. I think it's impressive, man, for how young he is as well. And interested to see how really it's going to come down when we're looking at this depth chart. He's going to be like one of those that we're keying in on of, whoa, where's he going to be at? He's going to be on offense, defense. Can we see where he's on both for this depth chart going into the Alabama game? And it's going to be It's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun. It seems like some playmakers are starting to arise, and that's something that at this point in camp, Delu. Let's see, you've got this week, and then you've got next week. Your next week, you're full of great. You're full of game prep. I think you really start that this week, honestly, for Alabama. But here is where you want to see. Okay, here's some ones that we've been listing out of, hey, who's going to step up in certain areas, and it seems like some of these guys are doing that, and like a Mekhi Dandy, like a Amari Williams, and that certainly makes you feel a little bit better if you're Gus moving forward, at least into this week, where it's very important on solidifying your foundation before the season really begins.
It's not going to surprise me at all if Amari is listed both ways. But like you said, I mean, he's made some tremendous strides physically. I mean, really dedicated himself in the weight room this offseason. And I mean, is carrying at least 20 more pounds than he was a year ago. And I mean, it's very good weight. This guy has been doing all the right things on and off the field for Florida State throughout the offseason and into the preseason. I mean, that's really why he's given himself a chance to be able to play both ways. And obviously, starting off the majority of camp at tight end so far after spending the spring on defense, Florida State, they have had some injuries in that tight end room. Landon Thomas and Chase Lofton among the guys who have been a little bit limited early in fall camp. That's given Amari a chance to make an impact over there. But I think on defense as well, he's maybe not going to be a guy that's out there as a starter on defense, but I think situationally, this is a guy that Florida State can use in a multitude of different ways, especially as a pass rusher. So, when they're in those long passing situations, second and long, third down, third and long, I think Amari Williams is going to be out there on the field providing that athleticism and making a push on the quarterback, because we remember back during spring, he was really impressing at the edge position.
Yeah.
Now he's coming to fall camp. He's impressing at the tight end position. And Mike Norvell, Chris Thompson, they both talked about, they were going to throw a lot at Amari Williams, a lot on his plate to see if he can handle it. I think he's done more than that so far.
Yep. And then I want to wrap it up here on at least the offensive side of the ball. And then we're going to certainly jump into what Tony White had to say. A little fired up, and I love it. I love it. But finishing off with the offensive line, a group that is gradually moving in the right direction, it seems like, from Gus Malzahn. Is everything perfect and exact where they want it right now? No, that's the case. We've still got some work to do. Mike Norvell said, I think they're definitely coming along. That confidence is building. It's an experienced group. They're just not experienced together. And then, yeah, that makes sense. You did not have a fully healthy unit in the spring. Multiple guys were out. So this is their first time getting out there together. And this is only their second scrimmage with one another. But you got to like that, having Luke Pettibon there in the middle of that offensive line, that glue, and now is starting to become a big time leader for you too, as well, has got to help maybe move that along a little bit faster. But it seems like they're starting to gel together more. And man, oh man, is this like one of the biggest question marks ever. It's always been one for Florida State's offensive line, but how disastrous it was last year. Everybody going into Doak Campbell Stadium is just praying to anything that you pray to, that this unit actually looks like a college football unit and not a high school jamboree unit. I mean, it's got to be better. It's got to do a lot better. And it's certainly got to do better in helping you in the run game as well, because that's something that Gus Malzahn predicates his offense on, and helping set up explosive plays for guys like Squirrel White or Deuce Robinson. But it seems like it's slowly, gradually getting there. And I think that's kind of where you probably would expect it to be. August 11th here. You got one more week. When is the next scrimmage? Do we have the
I don't believe there is another scrimmage.
I don't think. Yeah, I was gonna say. So like you're at a point here where that expected to be your last scrimmage work. Now it's all going to be predicated on practices, and we'll see. There's things, of course, they can do because we're not there. We don't know what they're doing, but that was a really important scrimmage for them. But it seemed like things were going well, and there were some big plays being made from your true freshman running back in the red zone, but also too there were some holes being made for some of your other running backs like Gavin Sawchuk and Cam Davis.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, just kind of take Mike Norvell's words as what they are, and it's an experienced group. They're just not experienced together. that kind of tells me it's been a little bit up and down for this Florida State offensive line so far in the preseason. And, they have done a good job, I think, for the most part, blocking in the running game. Pass blocking still a work in progress for this
Mhm.
offensive line, but thankfully you do have a shifty guy back there in Tommy Castellanos. And, we all got to remember, your two starting tackles were banged up for the majority of camp. Mike Norvell talked about last night, Jacob Rizzi, a guy who was expected to be a key reserve at multiple positions along that offensive line. He finally got back for the first time since the spring last night, got a little bit of live work in. And, offensive line, it's five guys that all have to go operate together. So if four guys do something right, but one guy makes a mistake, that could be the thing that causes the play to blow up. So the cohesion, the chemistry between that starting five is just so important for
Yeah.
Florida State. And, like we've talked about, these guys, they played a lot of football. They just haven't played a lot of football together. They missed those reps during the spring. So, I mean, early in the preseason now, and especially these next 2 weeks as well, they're going to have to continue getting on the same page because, hey, they've got a heck of a test coming for them on August 30th, and they can't afford to not be on the same page going into that first game.
Nope. And like you said, lucky you have a guy that's shifty as a quarterback up there to help things a little bit more. I'll go to a question just real quick. This is from Morris Simmons here on YouTube asking question. If the Noles join the SEC, do y'all think we will keep Miami on the schedule? And I mean, just depends on who's all moving to the SEC and such, but ratings wise and money wise, you would certainly expect for Florida State to continue playing Miami as them being also to one of their biggest rivals. But I would have that expectation because then too, you're just joining with UF with the SEC, and that's practically you're just flip flopping over. If you do leave Miami, Miami doesn't get invited, but no, I would expect for that just to continue and for Florida State to keep that rivalry going. It's mandatory.
No question. No question. I know the SEC, they play a 9-game conference schedule instead of an 8-game like the ACC. So I mean, it would make your out of conference schedule a little bit tougher to schedule Miami instead of
Yeah.
an FCS or Group of 5 opponent. But that's a rivalry that's going to go on for the foreseeable future. I don't think either side wants to give up that game, no matter if conferences change or not. They'll figure out a way to iron it out, just like we have with the Florida State Florida game. Even though they're in separate conferences, like you kind of alluded to, Logan, I think it would just kind of switch. In the SEC, that Florida State Florida game would be a protected game each season, and then you would make sure Miami's on there as a non-conference opponent for forever.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's money, man. It's money, and no matter what, how bad you Miami or FSU is, it's one of the top-rated games that people are tuning into just because of that rivalry that spreads across college football fans, not just fans or FSU fans are tuning in. It's all across the country, so I think that would only continue. We've got some questions about Earl Little Jr., which we're about to get into here in just a minute. Here's a question here from Terrell Thomas, our guy Terrell, asking here on YouTube, who's your favorite position right now and the weakest position to us? You're nodding your head. It feels like you kind of know your answers here pretty early on, D-Lou. What are you feeling? What do you feel the
Well,
strongest with?
I know my favorite. I don't know about the weakest. I'm still thinking about that one. But as far as my favorite, I mean, man, I really love that tight end room. Like, I think it could be absolutely dynamic, very versatile for Florida State. There are just so many guys in there. Your top 5 are all guys who are starting level quality football players. And you've got Chase Lofton, who is still getting there, but the additions of Randy Pittman and Marquise and Douglas are going to be absolutely huge at that position with the experience that they bring to the table. And I mean, Pittman, whether he's at tight end or at H-back or in the slot, he can just do so many different things for Florida State. And I think that added 15 pounds is going to be extremely big for him. I mean, we were just talking about Amari Williams, everything he can do. You've got Landon Thomas, and I know he's been a little bit banged up, but I mean, this is a guy with a ton of potential going into year 2. So, man, I really like that tight end room ahead of the season.
I agree with you right there. And then for me, I'll just add on, so we'll go defensive side. I really like that linebacker room right now. I know we just saw Blake Nicholson get thrown off from a true freshman running back, but man, the things that we've been hearing about Elijah Herring, which we're about to talk about here, who had a nice scrimmage as well, who we've heard great things all across the board on, and Juice Cryer, someone that was a big time he was a breakout guy for you last year. One of the only things that you could say good about last year was Juice Cryer, and it seems like he is really performing well in front of Tony White's eyes. I think that unit with Omar Graham Jr. as well, with the experience that he has, you got Stephon Thompson as well, who has those ties with Tony White. I think that room, you just feel security, and that's kind of what you want to feel like. That's what you want to have, at least in some of these positions. And I feel like that's a strength going into this upcoming season for that, at least for that side of the ball. The one that I would say here, I'm not going to overlook the question on, the weakest part to me, and it's primarily talking about depth here, I would say would be that defensive line, at least on the interior behind Darrell Jackson. That's one of my biggest concerns going into the season. I am starting to feel a little bit better, but it's the thing is Tony White is, keeps on bringing up these younger guys, these Desir twins.
Yep.
Man, it's not just one Desir, it's both twins. And I think it was, I don't know when it was, a couple months ago, and I was like texting either you or somebody. I was like, who are these guys? Who is this? And I thought it was like, I was like, is this a walk-on, 30-year walk-on? What's going on? Why is these guys so big? And I was like, oh, that's a true freshman. And then I was like, oh, there's another twin that's the same size. What are they, 6'4", 6'5", 260? And from what Tony White was just telling us too, after the second scrimmage, those guys are stepping up, man. And you're hearing things about Kevin Wynn too, which is great. You want to see him take those strides. He trimmed off some body fat as well, but he's looking to be somebody that is going to be able to jump into that rotation this upcoming season. You'd like to see, hopefully, KJ Sampson taking those next steps. Daniel Lyons too, who has always been in the shuffle, but can he be out there and make some plays for you? But yeah, and I still have some question marks about Darrell Jackson. I don't know why anybody wouldn't, because you had so much expectations for him last year. And yes, I saw some things start to come along there at the end, but he was ready to go to the NFL. He thought he already had everything put together to go there and give the opportunity, but he comes back. I think Tony White and Terrence Knight having that conversation with him where if you want to be a first rounder, second rounder, you have the physical attributes, but a lot of things got to be fixed up with your technique, the way that you're playing, and you have to emerge as a leader as well. So I have question marks about Darrell Jackson as well. So that's kind of my, where I would think the weakest is, but is there room for improvement? Is there signs where things could look better going into the season? Absolutely. But as of right now, that's still one of mine that I think is one of your weakest units going into this season.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel kind of similar about the defensive ends. You obviously know what you have in James Williams, and we talked about Amari Williams playing both sides of the ball, but outside of that, it's just kind of a little bit of a shuffle, and you're hoping to see some of these guys emerge. I don't think Florida State has seen enough out of DeMonte Diggs so far this preseason. It sounded like he was a guy that Tony White has been challenging over the last couple of weeks and said they want to see him emerge even more. And I mean, that's someone who Florida State brought in as a veteran to shore up that defensive end room. And yeah, Logan, I mean, like you were talking about, those Desir twins, I mean, they're giving themselves a chance to get on the field for Florida State. That constant praise is not it's not just something Tony White's doing for fun. I mean, he's seeing something from these two true freshmen. And, I think them alongside Kevin Wynn there in the interior, they're all making a name for themselves to play a lot for Florida State in 2025. And, this isn't going to be like years past. If there are guys out there, even if they've been at Florida State for 3, 4, 5 years, if they're not producing, this new coaching staff has shown, I mean, they're going to put these other guys out there on the field. There's not going to be any fear to pull that trigger and make that change. And, I think Tony White, he's bringing a very demanding attitude to this defense. And though he has been happy about some of the stuff that he's seen, he wants to see a lot more from his unit going into these final 2 weeks.
It's starting to seem like that if you're a veteran, you've been on this team for a very long time, yada, 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 it don't matter if you're not coming in with some effort and some energy and willing to make a play, then you're just not going to see the field, which I absolutely love. So let's start off over here with the defense, which there was some good news coming out of this as well, specifically on the defensive line, as we were just talking about it. But Tony White starting off the presser earlier this morning, calling out the defense, saying there are some guys, quite frankly, that need to step their ass up. Specifically calling out practically players that are expected to have high expectations going into this upcoming season that aren't performing at the level that he is expecting them to do, D-Lou. And, you flipped over. You previously had Adam Fuller, and there was always some question marks on if the players fully bought into him and the defense and everything and stuff like that. And, certainly you could tell from some players where you did see veterans out there last season who weren't performing highly, who weren't showing a whole ton of effort, but they continued to be starters for you going into the next week, into the next week, into the next week. And that's where we criticized Adam Fuller, along with also Mike Norvell, because the same shit happened on the offensive side as well, where you saw the same guys going out there who just weren't doing a damn thing for you. Inconsistency with not being able to catch the ball, no blocking off the side, just kind of being lazy with your play now. And so Tony White is trying to change a lot of that. And then you can tell that it's still a work in progress. And it kind of sucks that it has taken, it's going to take, a little bit of into your fall camp to switch that mental for you. But there's some younger guys that are going to come over and take your spot. And that's just exactly what Tony White is saying here. What are your thoughts on Tony White and kind of just the mentality that he's brought so far to this defense, and certainly calling out some of these guys that seem to be some more of the veterans ones that he's eyeing down here?
Hey, I mean, it's a breath of fresh air. I think you've really got to respect the attitude that Tony White brings, because not to criticize Mike Norvell, but a lot of these press conferences from him are more of coach speak, and obviously talking up the team and talking up different players. Tony White, I mean, he'll let you know. If he's happy, you're going to know about it. If he's mad, you're going to know about it. And it seems like he was pretty upset with that defensive performance last night. Like you said, Logan, I mean, talked about some guys that just haven't stepped up to that occasion, that expectation that they have for them on that defensive side of the ball. Also mentioned dropped two or three interceptions, which is something that carried over for the first scrimmage. I don't think he was very happy about that either. And just, I think a couple, just too many mistakes overall on that defensive side of the ball in the second preseason scrimmage. And Tony White, a guy who has led a top 25 defense the past 4 consecutive seasons, he demands a lot out of you. And he believes in these guys too. I mean, he knows the talent he has, and he realizes if they bring it to the field every play, what the potential of this defense could be. And he's just trying to bring the very best out of every single guy that he can. And he said, I mean, he's like, we're trying to get all these guys on the bus. We've got 50 guys on defense, and we're hoping they're all on the bus, but they have to step up and acknowledge that expectation as well. It can't just be the coach pushing you. Eventually, the player has to respond to it and step into that demand. And Tony White's still waiting to see that from some of the guys on Florida State's roster.
Yep, 100%. So going over to what Mike Norvell had to tell us about this scrimmage, we already talked about, where Jeremiah Wilson seems to be an absolute playmaker for you on the defensive side of the ball. Man, did they need someone like that. You have AZ who just went off into the league, so you had some open spots there at your corner position anyways. But not only just as a physical corner, and you're seeing that in some of the highlights that Florida State's showing, but two, creating takeaways. And I think that's something that Tony White is pressing very highly on from this defense. They need to see more of that. They need to get the ball in Thomas Castellanos' hands, get the ball over to the offense more. And the ways of doing that is to create turnovers. And Florida State got very close to doing more of those outside of Jeremiah Wilson picking off Tommy Castellanos. Elijah Herring supposedly almost had one. Tony White was saying there, almost grabbed an interception. Who, I'm super, 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 super high on Elijah Herring. I think he's going to be a pivotal playmaker for you on that defensive side of the ball with the experience that he has. And I'm hoping that he's also leading that room as well. He also talked about, Daryl Jackson, and, I've been questioning, we're not hearing a whole ton of Daryl Jackson. I don't know if that's just from the coaching side, just keeping things hush, 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 or, it's just not really being as disruptive of a player for you. We won't find out a damn thing until we get to the end of the month when they play Alabama, D-Lou, but he was pleased so far with how they're using Daryl Jackson, not just as a nose tackle, but moving him around across that line has been something that we had always projected of Tony White to do in this defense. But they like the progression there from him, which is good. But continues to bring up those Desir twins, if we're specifically talking about in that interior defensive line. There were some plays being made, but I don't know if that's something, it just doesn't seem like Tony White was overall pleased and some of the performances from some of these guys. And there's got to be better play there, no doubt about it. And I think he noticed some of that lacking last year, and he's really putting it down on some of these guys to step up. I want to mention here real quick some good news out of it though. Jason Jenkins was able to get some burn, and I know you were talking about that defensive end room. I would say Jason Jenkins getting back in the rotation is, of course, huge for Florida State because they thought very highly of him going into the spring, and the reason why they grabbed him from Tennessee. But also, too, one that we weren't talking about really a whole ton going into this fall camp was Jaden Jones.
Yep.
That seems to be outside of James Williams. And now Jason Jenkins getting into the rotation. Seems like Jaden Jones seems to be that DE2 on the other side of the ball for you almost.
But I will say, Tony White, I mean, still pushing him. Obviously, we heard a lot of good things about Jaden Jones after that first scrimmage. And, he was asked about Jaden earlier today and said the last week was just okay. So, doing everything he can to keep the guys in check while also pushing them to be their very best. But Jaden Jones, it does seem like he's giving himself a chance to be in that rotation in the defensive end room. And like we were talking about on last week, to get Jason Jenkins back this early, coming off what appeared to be a very serious injury that could have affected him into that 2025 season. I mean, man, it's just a testament to his work ethic. And, we've heard Mike Norvell, other coaches, other players all talk about the work that Jenkins has put in to get back onto the field. So to finally get some live work last night, he's going to have about 2.5 more weeks here to ramp up before that first game. This is a guy Florida State's very high on and a potential starter on that defense.
Norvell also brought up James Williams, your Nebraska transfer that came with Tony White, someone that, now is getting the work in to becoming a 3-down edge rusher for you. Also brought up Shamar Arnu. Those were actually the first defenders that he brought up in that presser. I said that Arnu had a really physical tackle in space on a running back and forced a fumble later on in the scrimmage. And, you were noting there in that tweet, D-Lou, this is not the biggest of guys. He's listed at 189 pounds, but came in with physicality and made that play. And I'm sure Tony White was very pleased with that as well. And, James Williams having to take that next step, man, that's something that, like you were just saying earlier, there's still question marks about who, your top defensive end, your top pass rusher, how is he going to do to develop? And that's just the same way too for Daryl Jackson. That's why it's so, I'm very interested to see what this defensive line is going to look like and perform going into this upcoming season. Or are we going to see some of these younger guys who are seeming to become playmakers, or at least showing the effort that you want? Are they going to come into the rotation a lot earlier than what maybe we're expecting? But James Williams being brought up, I think, is a really good thing. And Shamar Arnu. And I would really love to see James Williams and Thomas Castellanos, how that goes with James Williams getting back there, because James Williams is a very, very fast edge rusher, a lot of athleticism there, and tall and lanky. But then also you've got Thomas Castellanos, and you know what he can do with his legs and his vision. He runs like a running back. So I'm sure it's just kind of iron sharpens iron there, and helping each other out there and improving their play.
Yeah, and it sounds like James Williams, has put in some really good work for Florida State during the preseason. Like you said, Logan, trying to progress into that every down defender instead of a guy who was just relied on as a pass rushing specialist like we saw in Nebraska during the 2024 season. And, we talked about it on the podcast recently with the clip from Terrence Knight and servicing, and really, really pushing James Williams with some extra motivation through some choice words out there on the practice field. So I think he's responded to it very well. But, what's been interesting is the development of Shamar Arnu. The true freshman who got in back in January. We heard some good things about him in tour of duty and in spring practice, but it seems like he's taken, a complete leap now in fall camp. And Tony White basically said a night and day difference in Shamar Arnu since spring practice, and especially as of late during the preseason. So to go out there last night and like you said, Logan, force a fumble, make a really physical one-on-one tackle in space against a running back at just 189 pounds. Says a lot about Shamar Arnu's physicality and, willingness to go out there and put his face in the fan. And this is a guy, obviously Florida State pretty young in that cornerback room. Jeremiah Wilson is huge with the experience he brings, but outside of that, just not a ton of game experience or starting experience for most of the guys at the cornerback position. in that secondary. And if Shamar Arnu, I mean, keeps coming along, those guys, Quindarius Jones, Jabril Rawls, they're going to have to start looking over their shoulder because this true freshman, I mean, he's coming in there trying to take someone's spot.
Yep, was one of the biggest stars in that spring. Earl Little Jr., there was a question here earlier in the show asking about him, and he is someone that continues to be brought up throughout the fall and was someone that was highlighted in the spring as well. And I think that would be such great news for FSU. One of the highest rated recruits coming out of his class. Went to Alabama, then he comes over to FSU. Last year just didn't seem to fit well. Just depends, too, on where maybe things were going there with Adam Fuller and his defense, and some guys not maybe fitting in the right pieces, like in the right slots. But that's someone that, Earl Little Jr., he's out there with the ones. Seems like he's putting himself he's bringing physicality to him. That was something that never really lacked in his play too much, but being in the right spot was big, and getting improvement into his coverage as well. But it seems like those strides are being made from Earl Little Jr., and that just continues to be someone that is being brought up on this defensive side of the ball, D-Lou, which is good. I mean, you want to have that, and you knew that you had the physical attributes from him because he plays with that tenacity. But it seems like it's almost been a match made in heaven with Tony White's new defense coming into Tallahassee.
Yeah, didn't hear about him as much after this second preseason scrimmage, but I mean, it sounds like, and I mean, this is dating back to the tour of duty in the spring, but I mean, he's really bought in to this new role that he's playing on defense, that at that rover safety position, especially, after beginning his time at Florida State as a nickel cornerback. And, it seems like his skill set fits exactly what Tony White wants to bring at that role in Florida State's defense. Like you said, Logan, bringing the physicality. I mean, he's developed into a lot more of a vocal leader for Florida State and just really settled in with the Seminoles going into his second season. It just feels like he's a lot more comfortable. He's a lot more confident in his assignment, and that's just letting him to go play free on the football field. And I mean, as Logan also mentioned, this is a guy who was a 5-star prospect, among the best recruits in his respective class. And Florida State, they didn't quite get that resurgence that they were expecting out of Little Jr. last season, his first season after transferring from Alabama. But with where he fits into this defense, with how confident he is, and now going into this second season with the Seminoles, I think he's going to be a really good piece in the back end for FSU.
Anything else defensively that you want to note on in your notes, or that wraps up my notes there on my end, specifically on that side of the ball? Anything else?
We pretty much hit everything.
I think so too. I do want to note too as well, there were a lot of penalties in the first scrimmage, but Mike did say that there was a lot more of cleaner play still. Yes, had some things that they've got to work on, but discipline wise, felt like it was a lot better on the penalty side, which is really, really important because we've seen in some years for Mike's squad, penalties can be a game crusher for them in some scenarios, but some things were better cleaned up, it seemed like, in this second scrimmage. But ladies and gentlemen, I mean, we're close now to where Florida State is going to be hitting Doak Campbell Stadium. It seems like the renovations are coming along really nicely. They're getting some final touches done, I believe, this week. They're doing booster tours into that to showcase everything. So it's going to be interesting to see what it looks like there as a product. But, Florida State, it's been a long offseason, Dustin, and things are starting to really align of who's going to be your playmakers on offense and defense, also too, and special teams. I meant to ask Mike. Well, I did have my hand raised, but I guess we had to end a little bit early. But I did have my hand raised, asked about the the health. How did guys leave the scrimmage, because that's always important, but couldn't get that answer there. And who are some of your vocal leaders that are stepping up? Also, too, I would have loved to ask about the special teams there, because Jake Weinberg had a kind of rough first scrimmage. So hopefully he responded as well. So maybe we'll get some answers from that this upcoming week, because special teams is going to be playing a pivotal role. I think he brought up Samuel Singleton, though, who had a really nice return, which is good there. But, this is where it's becoming pretty much a lot of guessing game as we get into Florida State versus Alabama. Alabama starting to also have some question marks on what they're going to do at the quarterback position, but they've got a timeline with Kalen DeBoer of getting close to who they're going to be putting out there as QB1. So we'll be starting to keep a close eye on what the Crimson Tide are doing. So we're getting close, man. I'm excited. You ready to be back in Doak Campbell Stadium, D-Lou?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, It's about time. Hopefully the next experience is better than the last.
I think that's you and everyone else here in the Florida State fan base. But we appreciate y'all a ton hanging out with us on this Monday afternoon. Who knows? We might see you later this week. Just depends on what kind of news is dropping. But if you want to get notified, make sure you hit the like button down below. Also, to hit that subscribe button with the bell next to that. Next week, we'll be previewing Florida State's 2025 season, going game by game there and giving some predictions as well. And then after that, we got Florida State versus Alabama game preview. So we're officially in the train. Choo choo. Here we go, baby. I'm excited. And I appreciate everybody watching us this afternoon. We will see you in the next episode of Here to Spear. Peace.